the bigotry of low expectations. We're going to talk about today. Is it a real thing? Is it not? A lot of stuff going around in the country. Come back with us. Go. Welcome back to another episode of the South Star Classroom. That's Jubilee. That's David. I am Charles. Our brother is out somewhere gallivanting across the globe. Maybe Europe, maybe Uranus. Who knows with this dude? He just be living his life. I'm very jealous of his life. And he's also an incredible educator. I'm very, very happy to see you all. And before we get into today's topic, how about we let the people know how we're doing, and we will start with the with the lady of the show today, because we got manners. It's just, don't get used to this. It's not gonna be the thing every time. We're gonna have to like fall in with us at some point. But Miss Jubilee, how you doing?
I'm doing great, and I kind of already got used to it, so I kind of think you're just gonna have to stick with it because I like it.
What's up?
Right. So today we're great. We're representing Brooklyn, Brooklyn, everywhere I go from Maryland. And we had 77 degrees as our high for yesterday. What'd you have? I'm just saying.
You just held that in to David. We will go to you, brother. How you doing? And 77 degrees in Brooklyn. What is it in San Diego?
Right now, I mean, it's not bad. I have a jacket on inside my house. We have a heater, but it's cold. It's like 57, but like last night it was in the 30s. And yeah, we have like there's no such thing as climate change, right? We have this massive winter storm hitting the West Coast. It's snowing everywhere. It's snowing in San Diego and Los Angeles and the Bay Area. It's a really big storm, and I think the most of it's going to come tonight. So, that's been all the talk around the town here. Other than that, glad to be here. Work is definitely picking up as we come into the home stretch towards spring break. And so got a couple of interesting projects that I'm working on, and glad to be here, and thank you for those joining in the chat, in the comments. We see you, Jamoke, we see you. Thank you for being here.
Yeah. Welcome everybody. I'm doing well. It is definitely not. Are you saying so? 55 is cold and got you in the house in a jacket, huh? This is what I'm hearing.
Pretty funny.
I love it. He's buttoned up. Well, it is a nice warm 29 degrees here. It's fine with it. It's not been that big of a deal. Our definitions of cold have shifted, David, since we both lived in the same area, brother. But I'm good. There's you will hear banging. You might hear a bunch of different sounds in the midst of this podcast. I still have a lot of major work happening in my original studio, my basement, which is got flooded a few weeks ago, and we are trying to get that knocked out. But I'm really excited to be here with you all. And David, you sent over an article that was, I'll just preview it and you can give the details. And it was basically talking about how grading is changing in schools across the country as a result of COVID and just the culture currently. And tell us a little bit about what that was, because I have some personal skin in this game, as I drafted a policy that OUSD took and bastardized, and so I have a lot of feelings about it. But why don't you tell us what's going on in the Chicago Times today?
Yeah, so this is an op-ed in the Chicago Times. We'll put the article, the link in the chat at some point here. And the author is the current superintendent of the Archdiocese of Chicago schools. It's a very large school system across the Chicagoland area. His name is Greg Richmond. and he is talks about a couple of things. He talks about some of the shift in school organizations and schools and charter networks and districts around student expectations coming out of the pandemic. And he argues that lowering the expectations for students helps nobody. And then you also have situations where we have a couple of examples of school districts that are also working to level the playing field by eliminating opportunities for advanced learners, right? Certain awards, certain programs, we're seeing that around too. So it's this. He talks about that first off, and then he also talks about there was a statistic in the article that said if the Catholic schools across the U.S. were their own school district or their own state, it would be the highest performing state for low-income students across all 50 states. I found that to be very interesting. He talked about how, at least in his area in Chicago, how coming out of the pandemic, their reading scores on the NAEP, which is the National Assessment of Educational Progress, actually grew. So somehow students coming out of the pandemic, they were not shut down as long. They were in school longer, so that may have something to do with it. And then he also touches on this pre-pandemic shift that we had. And I don't know exactly how to pinpoint it, but it may have been in and around the George Floyd, right? And so the kind of racial awareness and awakening that has happened in the country. And he references one of the large national charter networks. I think it's the largest one. Don't cancel us for this. When they KIPP went from work hard, be nice, and they removed that as their kind of motto slogan because they felt like it was it may be promoting this concept of meritocracy, right? Merit. Somehow we're like moving away from individual merit, for young people, which is an interesting concept. I'll leave it there. I think it's an interesting piece. It's not just about the pandemic, but it's also about sort of the cultural shift that happened pre-pandemic. Yeah, we all have different perspectives on it. We have different, Charles, you've done policy work. I've run schools. I'm a parent now, and Jubilee, you as well. So I think we're all experiencing it from different seats on the bus.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, this question of is there such thing as soft bigotry or low expectations? I actually do think that there is. I think here's my initial take just on this, right? Like, I think everything is in such a extreme. There's people on the right that's like, everything is woke, everything is this, and we need to, like kind of going hard there. And then there's people way on the left that's like, abolish grades, like about the concept of school is like crazy, right? And it's just like, everybody pump your brakes for a minute. And the reason why I have such a personal piece in this is because, some of our work that we started, what brought David and I so close was just the way we would watchdog certain things around the state, and A through G requirements being one of those. So one of the things that I saw was kids were graduating from high school, and we were saying all these Black kids were graduating, but less than half of those kids would be qualified based off of A through G. And, in high school, a D is passing, but for college grades, a D is not passing. So in my organization, we built a policy, and the policy was basically around dump the D, but not to get rid of the D grade. If you earn a D, then you have a D. It was more around, it was putting pressure on the district and the school apparatus to actually inform parents of what a D is, to actually inform them of, hey, this might work here, but if you want your kid to go to college, we need to do these things, or making sure that they're making it up or catching it early so that young person might not get a D. And the district took that, which we got to them in good faith. I would say Energy Converters and Families in Action. And somewhere along the line, and districts do this, when it gets to the board level, this thing happens. Somewhere along the line, it turned into, we not giving out D grades. So no more D. So then all these people were like, Charles wrote this thing, and he wants to get rid of the D. And I said,
the school district is where good ideas go to die.
To die, slow, painful deaths, like terrible, horrible, like deaths. And so I do think that there is a bigotry of it. And I know who the author of that was, and people tend to associate it with it. But let me tell you what I mean. In my work, I've watched well-meaning people, many not black, but some black and brown as well, that have had different upbringings and different, and they want to do well. And so what they'll do is they'll skip my kids forward, or they'll go easier on them, or they'll do these things. I'm like, no. Don't think that because we grew up in poverty that we cannot learn. I understand that there are ACEs. Right. Like there are multiple conversations that's happening here. You can serve a whole student and still make sure they're getting a quality education. You don't have to let a child skate through. And part of the reason that I have been somewhat successful in people's eyes is because I went hard via education. My parents went really, really hard on that. Like, because I was poor, they were like, you got to do better, which might also not be fair. But I grew up living in public housing and shelters. And now we're talking about the basement in a home that I own being flooded, right? Like I'm not, and everybody gets really offended on that stuff, man. So I think I get offended when I see those things happening because ultimately that only makes that adult feel better, and it hurts that young person and that community more in the long run. Be good at your job. I was a social worker. You're not a social worker. I need you to teach what you teach. But, you know, I don't know what you all think about it. What, Jubilee, do you think there is an issue, you know, as David put to us, like, do you think there is a soft bigotry of low expectations that gets put on black, brown, poor kids or whomever?
I think that black and brown children are impacted just by default, because we're talking about this this kind of shift, and you named the pendulum. That's what I was writing down in my notes. Like, can we stop swinging the pendulum from one side to the other? We are constantly doing that, you know, as it relates to education and decision making. So my question is, right, what I'm curious about is like, whose idea was it to make this change? Right? Whose idea was it to lower the expectations? And who were they doing it for? Why did that become important? And I'm not saying that I have the answer, but it makes me think, right? Or I'm going to lean to the side of, it was probably people in power, people in position and power and privilege that were trying to find a way to ensure that their children, their students, their young adults would still be able to make a clean ascension to wherever they're supposed to be going, right? Whether it's top high schools, top colleges, or whatever, and didn't want the learning loss that happened during pandemic to be able to impact their children who are also privileged and in positions of power. So that's my thought. And I think black and brown children, right, end up, quote unquote, inheriting that benefit, which is not a benefit, I believe, for black and brown children. I agree with you in terms of we're not skating. We don't need to be told to skate through, or, oh, you plagiarized an entire paper. Good job. Yes, I think that's terrible messaging, terrible. Right. And it's not gonna, it will not help us. But that's my question. That's my wondering. Like, who made this policy or these shifts, and who were they doing it for? And I don't think that it was for black and brown.
And these systems, I mean, even prior to the pandemic, you know, we saw, you know, you can go into a school district and look at their, you can look at their graduation rates, you know, which might be on the higher end, but then when you look at like proficiency on standardized tests or, you know, other measures and metrics, you can look at attendance. You know, a lot of times we often see a huge gap between those two things. And you're like, well, if a student's not showing up, if you have a very high rate of students that are chronically absent, you know, if your standardized test scores, only one measure, are like, you know, below 20%, how are you graduating all these children? Like, what are they actually prepared to do in the real world? And I think that predates, you know, all of this idea of social promotion, or what do they call it? You know, like, not the savior complex, but just, you know, like, we feel sorry for these poor kids, and we're gonna help them out. by moving them along this conveyor belt, which is K-12 public education. You know, and that's the greater harm. Greg also brought up a couple of other pieces in there. He talked about attendance. Mm-hmm. He talked about tardies, you know, all these things that, you know, is school discipline that we talk about. And I think the truth, again, is like somewhere in the middle. It's not, you know, you shouldn't be suspending children if they're showing up to school late or not showing up. You actually want them in school, right? And at the same time, we shouldn't accept students showing up late and not coming to school. So I think for me, you know, in my experience, both as a parent, as a former teacher, and as a principal, was like, yeah, high expectations, especially coming out of the pandemic. However, that means you have to shift the supports that you're providing to ensure that students can meet those expectations. But I feel like lowering the expectation, and we see it around, I see it in a lot of different places. And I think the long run, it's just going to end up hurting children. It's going to hurt children, and the children it's going to hurt the most are children that we talk about in the show, Black and brown children.
Yeah, man. I mean, I think, you know, just around so in the article, in the article was a commentary, and what he was pointing out was that they wasn't doing this in private schools. That he is over like over the you know, over Catholic schools, and you know, you had a wonder in there earlier, Jubilee. This isn't something that's put like this, the wealthy white schools that it's happening at, it's a school by design, right? Where like that school was already going to be, we about to be walking with our shoes off and hugging trees. Like that's something that's been happening, you know, commune stuff, right? Like, but where a lot of these things were happening this stuff was coming across in places where it's going to be mostly Black, brown, and poor kids. And part of the reason that I probably felt so strongly about and did this work, and Jamoke is in here, she can actually attest to it. She was a school board member in Oakland, was that every time we pushed the district for them to have more accountability and responsibility to the education and well-being of students, they always found a way to flip it and like relinquish even more responsibility. It's almost like every movie you see where there's a genie and like you make this very like unassuming wish, and it's like I want to be the best basketball player, and then but you don't become better, everybody just becomes terrible. Like it's like always this constant flipping of what the people kind of need, and I think that is both sides. I really do. I truly, this pendulum shift that we are in right now, it's everybody. It is everybody. You said where did this come from? Go on Twitter. The only stuff that gets bumped up on the Twitter, on Reddit, on Facebook, on Instagram are the things that get interaction. And guess what? Right. Middle of the road, common sense thinking that kind of gives and takes, that does not get you attention. Mm-hmm. What gets you attention is saying, I want to abolish this. I want to do this, and I want to do that. And I just think that it's terrible. And I think
shock value.
I think it's really what it is, but you know, I don't want to hog up too much airspace. I mean, we having a conversation. This ain't a panel. We can go back and forth. Yeah. I'm just curious, but go ahead. I just wanted to give a little bit of answer to that.
I mean, I agree. I think that it's avoidance at best, because I think as a nation, we still have not answered some really key questions in education. And until we actually sit down, I might say this every episode, until we sit down with all the stakeholders, right? Mm-hmm. I'm talking about parents, principals, teachers, coaches, janitors, CBOs, politicians, until we sit down and have a conversation about, wow, how has our nation shifted, right? Pre-pandemic, during pandemic, post-pandemic. How has our world shifted? What do our students really need based on where our world is and going, right? Like, until we sit down and answer these core questions, the pendulum is going to continue to swing. And we're going to continue to get these knee-jerk responses that are like, oh my God, abolish this, roll this out. And, you know, just like any system, if it took years to build this system, right, that has some things that might be cool and some things that are like terrible, it's going to take some time to dismantle a system that is harming kids. But I feel like we avoid the conversation. Yeah,
I think that there's definitely like a cultural element to this too. if you're running a school district, and even within a big school district, they have schools in different areas with different demographics. You have to be tuned into your particular community. And sometimes that means like, oh, this is the expectation in this community. However, like research shows this is not good for kids. So I'm going to help you to understand why this is important. I have a quick story about my time at a school in Oakland that was in an urban area, and it was a charter school, and it was a Montessori school. So I was a brand new leader to elementary education. So I had only done high school. So I was new to elementary, and I was also new to, leading in a diverse school environment. We had white folks, we had Asian, we had Black, we had brown, we had, Middle Eastern. It was, it was a very diverse school. It was beautiful, but it was young people, and it was a Montessori school. So talking about like somebody referenced nobody wearing shoes and trees or something like that. And so when I got there, so we were putting some of the basic building blocks in place. The school had already been open for 2 years. This was the third year when I came in to stabilize. And I said, we have to put up some basic guardrails, some basic structures within this school. And one of them is like a hard start time, right? You have instructional minutes. You get paid by the state for running a school for X number of minutes a day, X number of minutes a week, a month, and a year. That's the exchange with the government, right? And so you start at 8:15, and we had to put systems in place. Like if you weren't in the building by a certain point, you are late. Not the end of the world, but you need to go get a tardy pass and do that whole thing. And the whole community, not the whole community, but a good chunk of the community fully melted down. They're mainly white moms that came to my board meetings and accused me of creating a police state on the campus. And a police state. I'm like, these people you have to show up on time. And these kids are going to have jobs at some point, and they have to show up on time. And so we teach them when they are young, right? And if you can't get there on time, we'll work with you. We'll figure out what you need, right? We're not just going to hang you out to dry. But it was mind blowing that people felt like it was just appropriate for children to be dropped off at school, within a 30-minute window, just kind of come on in without an expectation that morning circle is going to start at 8:15. You got to be here for it, right? Blew my mind. So we kept it, and we did a lot of other things. But that was a cultural piece where, I may not have been super tuned into the existing culture, but eventually over time, putting in structures and expectations helped to lift all boats at the school.
Yeah,
it's harder for adults. Harder for adults than it is for kids. I'll tell you that.
Jump in, Jube. You were about to say something. I can go after you.
Because I'm sitting here listening and I'm reflecting on my kids. Like if I drop them off late, they take the school bus now, but when I was back in Brooklyn and I had to take 2 different kids to do 2 different schools, sometimes they were late. And don't call my phone. Don't call me. Of course they would, right? But you said something like teach them when they're young, right? I think that this word expectations, right? Like high quality instruction and high expectations has been like ruling our educational landscape for years, right? And I think that the pandemic has brought up the need to reevaluate what things belong in the high expectation category, what things can children be held accountable for, and how will we hold children accountable knowing that they are directly connected to their parents, right? And without their parents, right, or their caretakers, right, that level of accountability may not be able to be reached. So that's what I was sitting here, thinking about. But I can tell you, right, that in my real life, if I tell my sons like tomorrow, because it's their high expectations, that's how I raised them. Got to be on time, right? Y'all got to go to school tomorrow at 9 o'clock. Mommy, why we got to go to school at 9? Look, it is what it is. And so, yes, the high expectations and the make sure that you're everywhere on time. But what I told them is like, in real life, sometimes you're late. In real life, right? As an adult, you take off days from work. And so I find myself now, right, post-pandemic, trying to balance them out, right? After having them in school systems for years that were like high expectations, right? And it's like, but the human part of that is missing, right? I don't have to be near dying to be out of school, right? So anyway, I don't want to get off topic.
I like this.
no, that's topic. That's core to the topic. I mean, a follow up is like so like school system.
I think it's core. Oh, go ahead. I think my audio is messed up. I'm sorry.
Okay.
But I absolutely disagree with I love this. And Jubilee, I'm so happy and honored to like fight you today. Like, listen, there's nothing wrong. Like, listen. There are again extremes, right? If you are expelling a kid or being like, yo, you was 5 minutes late, you can't take part in nothing today, this, that, and the third, this is gonna happen. But there's nothing wrong with setting an expectation that we expect you to be on time. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. I'm just saying.
I agree. Well, what I am saying is, right? Case in point, my son was sitting at the table boo-hooing. Right? Why was he boo-hooing? It was all connected to high expectations and him having to have this high level of output, right? And not enough time to process stuff, not enough time to be human about stuff. And that's the part that me as a parent and a human being try to fight as it relates to high expectations, right? Yes, get up, go to school, be there on time, be there early, right? If you can, but also don't beat yourself up if something gets in the way of that, because that is part of the human freaking experience. And to tell kids that it's not fair. Like,
I'm not saying that you don't tell kids that it's not. I'm not saying that you don't tell kids that it's not. But one, I don't know all the details around what was going on with your boy specifically, right? What I do know is that in real life, there is real life pressure. And I do know that there are people from a different generation from before this where you didn't get babied in the same way. And it's just like, yo, like, sometimes you got expectations and you will fail at some of those expectations, but this is how you deal with it. And I think that we are raising a generation of young people that will soon be adults. And many of them are adults. Many of them are in my millennial, like age range or whatnot. And they don't know how to deal with failure or with letdown. And then they completely come apart when life actually happens. Like the reason why I think I go so hard on this is because I had y'all know I grew up in shelters and stuff like that. And my dad is a very prideful guy. And I remember like right before we ended up in one of the shelters, like somebody at his job a boss said something to him. And my dad did the thing that sometimes black people do. Other races do it too, but I ain't talking about that. I'm talking about my family around. And you're going to tell a boss what you ain't going to do. Well, guess what else you ain't going to be doing? You ain't going to be working here.
Have a job.
And then you lose that job. And then bills don't get paid. And then guess what? That apartment you had, you don't have a place to stay. Like, I think the biggest blessing, one of the biggest blessings in my life, though, was being homeless as a kid. And it's because it showed me that this world, like seeing the ugly parts of the world early on, allowed me to have more respect for certain type of things. And if I don't want to work for those people and I don't want to deal with those people and them people is this, that, and the third, then I better go build my own. And that's why I run my own companies now. You get what I mean? So I think that I agree with what y'all are saying. I agree with what you're saying, Jubilee, on the whole. Like, I wrote a book about it, right? Like, there's a false dichotomy that says you can either educate a child well or you can you can treat the full child. I don't think it's an either or. I think that you can actually be a good human being and make sure that young people are taking care of themselves while also being rigorous in English and math. And part of this issue is that, look, sometimes kids fall behind. That don't mean we need to hold the whole class back so everybody can feel equal in that mode, right? Like, there are things that I'm good at in life and there are things that I'm not good at. And part of that as a kid and growing up, what you're supposed to be getting in school, this is supposed to be the place where you're failing and you dealing with it, you learning and you dealing with it, you get bullied and you dealing with it. And now we have a generation where we've taken that stuff out. And I'm not advocating for bullying, but what I'm saying is there were certain things, social skills that you would learn along the way in those schools. And if we keep treating all this stuff with poor kid gloves, we just not raising a generation that's going to be able to deal with a China or a Russia or with global influencers or business or things like that. That's my larger point.
You're talking about, I think you're talking about the concept of we misuse this term a lot, discipline, right? We think of discipline as something that happens to you because you made a poor choice or you broke a rule, right? So now you're going to be disciplined. But discipline is actually an internal concept, right? Of following procedures, following a process of you know, having a sort of sense of like internal control, right? And awareness around how you move, right? And I think, you know, I think that's what you're getting at, Charles. And it's a big thing. It's not just about, at this point, it's not just about education. It's about our country as a whole and the workforce, you know, and like where we are going to stand, you know, in terms of you know, where the U.S. is going to stand like globally, right? You do have other countries that, you know, their education system is highly regimented, like one size fits all. And it works for, you know, many kids, and the ones that it doesn't, I don't know what happens, but you know, that's a very real thing. And a lot of those young people come out of the systems and, you know, like, I guess they're ready to pledge allegiance to the flag, whatever flag they have, you know. We can't even do that here. They won't even let us, there's like a lawsuit right now or something, a First Amendment thing. When I grew up, we used to pledge allegiance to the flag. You know, I probably wasn't into it all that much, but it did, you know, help me to understand that, like, regardless of where we are all from, we are now part of this larger thing called the United States of America. And you start watering that stuff down and you start to have other issues. You know, now we're kind of getting into like the culture war stuff, right, around schools. And, you know, I'm glad my kid goes to a public school. It's a big school. You know, I tend to talk about the good things, but, you know, there's things that are happening at his school. You know, he's had some physical threats and this and that. He's working through them, but he's experiencing like real life. Like I'm not there to protect him. You just have to deal with it or ask for help. So I you know, that's real. And that's, I think sometimes, you know, we try and find learning environments for our children that, you know, they should all be safe, but I think young people also have to deal with adversity, right? You know, instead of, you know, living in a kind of bubble. But the other piece, which I'm glad, maybe we can talk about like so we're talking about assessment. Jubilee, you were talking about like, this is the moment to like rethink what we value in schools, how we measure it, moving away from a math and an ELA mindset to different mindsets, but still measuring things that matter to us and expecting growth and expecting progress, right? But I feel like right now we're not measuring those things and everything's just kind of like, well, we're going to wait until we figure it out. Meanwhile, we have all these children in school. I'm glad for one that our school district still issues report cards. I'm looking at my kids' grades right now, and every assignment scored. You know, might be on the easier side of the grading scale, but I can see what he's done, what he hasn't, and you know what scores he got with comments, and that matters. And the idea that they're moving away from like letter grades in schools, that's frightening. I mean, I've met some people that went to UC Santa Cruz back in the day. They were like the first UC to not have grades. You know, and yeah, banana slugs. That's all I got to say.
Hey, so, man, that banana slugs got a smoke out day. Go ahead, Jubilee. They do. They do.
I know they do.
But I think one of the words, so I'm looking at the soft bigotry of low expectations, and I think that there's something underlying there, right? And that is the fact that we have yet to address trauma. Right. When I hear you speak about your childhood, Charles, when I think about certain aspects of my childhood, of my life, right, and even of my children's life, right, I hear trauma. I hear things that, right, that are hard to overcome, right, not impossible, but hard to overcome. And I think that we have re-entered, right, into schools without necessarily a real in-depth plan to deal with the whole socio-emotional aspect. And I think this generation of babies, they have experienced a level of trauma that few understand, right? And so when we think about, you know, expectations, it's like, are we able to really hold them accountable for that when they spent a year? Well,
can I hold you accountable to do your work or to like, or I think we should hold schools accountable to teach. Well, go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off.
It's fine. I think I'm all for accountability. Teachers should be coming in, doing the things they need to do. Students should come in, doing the things they do, right? But both have experience. Leaders should come in, everybody should come in and do what they need to do, right? There's no excuse for not being accountable, but there are some reasons, right? And some issues, some underlying issues that I think need to be addressed in order for people to be fully productive, right? And the truth of the matter is there's so much more to contend with in school environments now than pre-pandemic, so much more. And I still don't think I think few have figured out how to begin to recoup.
I think it's different. I don't think it's more. I think it's different. I think that's unfair. And this is why I say this. I think it's unfair to other generations of people. Like the pandemic was crazy, and it had not been seen by people in this generation. Don't forget there was a Black Plague. Like there was like that killed like. I mean, what it killed a lot more people than COVID, right? Like the largest growth.
You talk about something that was like in the last 30 years. What?
I could the crack epidemic. The crack epidemic was extremely traumatizing for people. Like people went to school during World War I, World War II. Like people have gone to school in the middle of wars. I had Yemen kids that came that are in energy converters who got over here because they're where they live got bombed. Like so, like I hear what we're saying. I'm just saying, like I'm just giving you examples of like extreme traumatic like experiences that COVID was absolutely traumatizing for a lot of people, and we lost a lot. But this narrative of that this is the worst thing that's ever happened to people, like and people have. You said what?
To the children in this generation thus far, right? Outside of
do you think that COVID was more traumatizing than kids that attended Columbine High School?
I don't, but I'm also not comparing experiences. I'm saying that standalone.
You said to give you example is what I'm saying. What I'm saying
that's
is
fine, but I don't compare trauma like this person got killed, this person got raped. I'm not comparing. I am saying standalone. If you were 4 years old to 18 years old in the past years, and you had to go to school and they shut down your school, or you had a teacher that passed away from COVID, or you had to be home in the house and you were trying to get away from.
It was terrible.
Because there was abuse or there was poverty or whatever. I'm saying that it could have potentially been the worst part of your life. And now it's like schools are open, let's go. So I'm not comparing, right? I am saying that the shit was traumatic. That's what I'm saying. And I'm saying that we have the high expectations and we have do this, but we need the support to be up there as well, because these children have a lot of different perspectives. They've learned a lot by being home, some good, some not so good. There's high levels of depression, high levels of low self-esteem. There's a lot of other negative things
were kids struggling with low self-esteem before COVID? I'm just saying, COVID was terrible and COVID exasperated things. I wrote this article in 2016 about if you think that how we're educating Black kids has nothing to do with gentrification, you're wrong. I named stuff in 2016 before the pandemic, before these things. And what I'm saying is that even with these traumatic things that are happening and we have more information and we know more things now, like at some point, right? Like we still have to. Here's my question to y'all. Let me just throw it back to us, right? I love this conversation, by the way, because we finally are not like doing the you go, let's all kumbaya. Like, let's have this conversation, right? Y'all are both parents and educators. And these are the right things to say. But if you keep sending your kid to a school where they just are constantly not meeting the bar, where they are taking grades away, where they are not pushing, and you know what a rigorous classroom is, and Jubilee, you know what a rigorous classroom is, not what is the world doing, not what is San Diego or the Bronx doing, or Black people or whatever. What are you doing if your kid is in that type of situation, knowing everything that you know? If you know, and let's also, let me just add this caveat. Schools are not even doing that good a job of addressing trauma now. So let's not make it seem like they doing it, like they killing the game with that. So instead of us saying what everybody should do, let me ask you all directly. And then Jubilee, I'll start with you and David. I want to hear from you both, right? Because y'all are the parents. So I'm gonna throw my hands up.
I'll let David go
first. Okay, well, David, for your kid, for your son that you are raising, and you like, man, my kid is kind of struggling to deal with these social situations. You know, you mentioned a few shows ago that it was like a bully mess with him, and you waited a little bit to kind of see what he was going to do or whatever the case is. So you have your son, and he's not being prepared for the hard life that you know is to come if he don't have these certain tools and these skills. What is David Castillo and Mrs. Castillo doing about that?
I mean, I'm going to make the school work. I allow my child to work. I give them space to work through particular situations, checking in with them, making sure they're not in any kind of like imminent, threat of physical harm. And then, when it's time to step in, you provide your child with tools so that they can self-advocate. And then you wait. And the expectation is that the school is going to respond. That might be a physical, threat, or a mental health issue, or an issue with a teacher. But at the end of the day, the expectation is that, the schools are there for our children, and the schools are accountable to parents, and they must be responsive. And at the end of the day, if they're not responsive, then you find another school. You're not going to change a school system, right? But you have to give the opportunity, provide the opportunity for a school or a school system to actually function as it is designed to function, providing particular types of supports, right? We've been fortunate. Wasn't so fortunate in Oakland. Sometimes it wasn't even fortunate when I had my kid at my own school. Factors out of my control. But I'm a big believer in. So I see Crystal Rodriguez is saying, talking about like during the pandemic and like interpersonal skills and this and that. During the pandemic, I ran a pod out of my home. 5 days a week, right? For between 5 and 6 kids a day. That was my job. I shut everything down. My wife worked full time, and but what I did was like, and some of them were family members too. But I believe in structure, and so I didn't even let the kids come in the front door. They had to go around the back of the house. I'm like, we're in school now. We had it downstairs. This is the school room. This is the pod. You can't go upstairs because your aunt's working up there. That's not what we're here for. This is not a social event. You're in school, right? And you have to be here on time, and you have to follow basic rules. I'm a huge believer in structure. Mm-hmm. Children thrive in structured environments where there are clear expectations that they can meet. And if they can't meet them, you help them to meet them. So I believe that young children and old children and all adolescents thrive in environments where there's structures. And the structures I'm talking about here are like expectations for being on time, expectations for turning in work. And then also the structures that the schools provide the families and students, expectations for here's how we are going to help you, right? These are all structures. And I feel like when you start to tear down those structures, you start to have a whole other host of issues. The structures are going to look different post-pandemic. I understand that. But nonetheless, structures are really important for teaching young people developmental skills that they are going to need, in their lives beyond K-12.
So we heard you say, as you go to Jubilee, make the school work. There's something around structure, and basically what I'm hearing, and which I agree with, is like, so by making the school work, whatever they're doing well, exemplify, help push on that, and what they're lacking, it seems like you are finding your best ways to fill those gaps to make, because I got you. Cool. Jubilee, for your kids, you got 2 boys, 2 black boys that's going into a world that don't really care about their trauma, just to be real with you, right? Like, I mean, it's a good soundbite, and nonprofits is gonna make money off of it. But when you're in the real world, like outside of this, I'm just saying, and you got them at a school where the rigor has dropped, they ain't giving out grades. You know what I'm saying? They just kind of trying to make sure that they feel good as opposed to making sure they educated. What is Jubilee Ransom doing?
Well, one, I agree with what Dave said, right? But I just see it flip, right? So to me, education, it starts at home, right? Mm-hmm. So I feel like them going to school is filling the gaps, right? They're giving them that basic geography and the other stuff that I don't want to teach them, but know that I could if I really tried, right? But I don't relinquish my right to educate my children to a school system. I also don't believe that education is only happening in a school building. So mm-hmm. For me, right? So what do? I teach first of all, character is my biggest thing, right? Whether or not you are college educated, right, which is important to me, but that's a whole nother topic, right? Whether or not you are, your character is really what helps to sustain you, right? Whenever you get wherever you're going, you need character. So that's the foundation for me. I start there, right? And then in terms of like them being in the system, because my sons also go to a public school, right? Mm-hmm. And I have to work with the school. I have to make it work. I don't love it. I don't love the school at all. Right? I had to sit my sons down when I understood the landscape of how Maryland schools work, how Prince George's County works, and that it's very much meritocracy and very much this hierarchical kind of thing. I had to sit them down and be like, yo, they have only been honor roll. They've only been in, it wasn't tagged as gifted and talented, but like, you know, high scores on pretty much everything, right? Well, I had to sit them down here and be like, listen, you're not in tag. I don't even, that's another story as well, because I don't even really believe in that, right? But I know that you belong, you know, with peers that are performing well and all of that. That's not how they do it here. So I looked at them, I said, you're gonna have to just go to school and make it do what it do. That's it. I said, only your work will speak for you. Only your work and your character will speak for you. Well, what happened? 2 weeks ago, I got a call from the guidance counselor. Hi, we looked at your child's diagnostic scores and we want to offer a seat in honors. And then 2 days ago, what happened? Hi, it's a guidance counselor again. So your child is eligible to now go into the gifted and talented section. And in my mind, I'm like, this is what I told y'all, right? But my children went in there. They're both on honor roll. Here's the pin, right? They're both on honor roll, principal honor roll, one of my sons. And they went in, they hustled. They are doing what they need to do, right? I've taught them to advocate for themselves. And I've taught them that your work is going to speak for them, right? Now, I also took them to Jamaica in September, a couple weeks after school started. Don't call my phone. Leave me alone. Want to know why? Because we're at the Bob Marley Museum. We're visiting family that we've never met, our family in Jamaica, right? And that's education too. So don't try to pin me down, right? They're going to go to school. They're going to hustle. They're going to do what it takes to be great, because that's what's expected. But they're also going to have a balanced lifestyle, and they're going to go to therapy and pray to deal with whatever trauma that they have experienced in life so they can overcome that as well.
So Jubilee, would you be in favor of the school that your children attend, you know, doing away with the honors programs and any other kind of, you know, merit-based achievement awards that they may be doing? So, you know, we're talking about meritocracy, right? So how would you feel about that if they sent out something and said, we're doing this in the name of equity. We don't want kids to feel bad. And we think this is a good way to, you know, help all students, especially students that may be struggling.
Yeah, I honestly wouldn't have an issue with it, but the reason is dumb. So because of the reason, we don't want kids to feel bad. That's why I wouldn't support it, because the reason's dumb, right? Like, what are we doing? Are we watching Sesame Street here, right? Like, yes, in our world, there are systems and there are levels and all of that. If they said they wanted to get rid of it because they believe that they should have teachers that are able to deliver high quality instruction no matter what. If you got a kid in there that's got an IEP, autistic, a level 16,000 on some rare test, then I'd be like, bet, I love it, because you're talking about improving practice for all students. For you to like get rid of a policy so that people feel better, that's dumb. I would not support that at all. And again, like I said, when I sat my sons down and told them about this whole, like, they're not looking at your grades that you're coming in here with, even though your grades are bomb. They're saying that you didn't take this G&T test, so they can't let you in. So your work will speak for you, right? I think that children should be, you know, taught based on the level of proficiency that they're showing in their understanding, period. Level 1, level 4, level 16. So.
I 1,000% agree with you too on that, Jube. And I think, see, I appreciate these conversations, because Jubilee, where I was pushing back and what I think, and I used to deal with this with Sharif and them A Black Hands too, right? Like, there is something really good inside of y'all. I think you're a good person. And I think that good person in you is like, this is what we should do for everybody. Like, the system needs to do this. Like, this is what a good system would look like. I don't have faith in a good system. There's never been a good system that has served Black people in this country in mass. Never been one that served brown people in this country in mass. So I don't expect for it to be coming. And not, that doesn't mean to say that I'm not going to push for it, that I'm not going to, you know, make sure that we're getting to that place. But I like to deal and prepare my people for the world that they live in now. The reason why don't nobody in the hood really want to see them get rid of those type of programs, especially that are feeling strongly about education, is because they know that if you get earmarked for a special or a gifted and talented program or an academy or something like that, that you're going to have a different type of teaching, different type of classes, different type of opportunities. And the young people that are not tracked in that way are going to get the same terrible stuff that they've been getting. And see, here's the thing, right? Like, we talk about stuff like, man, like meritocracy is bad or this, that, and the third, until you need some shit done for you. And let me tell you what I mean, right? It's like if you're going to the doctor, and all of us have had medical procedures, and Jubilee, you've been very public about yours, and I love hearing about your story, right? But if you're about to go into that table, and then you find out right before you go under, well, this person, it was just too much pressure on that, on what it took for them to be a good surgeon, and they had trauma, and they had these things going on, but we gave them the job anyway. You're gonna be like, hell no. Especially now, if they operate on one of your kids, you're gonna be like, no, that's unacceptable. If somebody's about to build you a house or a bridge, listen, man, we've been trying to redo the Bay Bridge. That Bay Bridge was like 10 years overdue from when they was trying to get the seismic stuff right, and it kept breaking. Like, it just kept breaking. These people were incompetent, right? Like, don't nobody want to hear those stories in the real world, man.
You're right.
The world market.
But is that meritocracy? Is that meritocracy, or is that, like you said, like either incompetence or lack of proficiency in the field?
I think that it is. I think meritocracy. Listen, man. Let me just say this. I think that people on the far right are crazy, and I think that people on the far left are crazy. I think that we are sandwiched by crazy people. I think it is crazy.
It's a lonely place. It's a lonely place.
I think it is crazy to say you cannot teach your kids about Black people and that they had a history before slavery and that they came from kings and queens and all this stuff. And somehow that feels like a threat to you or the union. I think you are crazy if you say that. I also think that it is crazy if you are showing, like, if you want to show, and I know that this is not everybody, but enough dumb people was doing it where they was talking to second graders about sex and stuff. I am okay with parents saying, why the hell are you having that discussion with my child, right? I think both extremes are crazy. I think that everybody is jockeying for attention because of social media and just the access that we have to it. And all I'm saying is, if I'm raising kids in this world, if I have people that I love in this world, I'm like, listen, I give students this game all the time. If you can show up 85% of the time and halfway try, I promise you're going to progress, because you are going up against people that expect something. They are expecting something. You need to expect nothing. You need to expect nothing. When you get good things, it is a blessing. But like I'm not trying to poison the well. I'm not trying to be a Debbie Downer or nothing like that. What I'm saying is I've lived this life, and because of the things that I've gone through, which have been traumatic and all those things, but there are things that I'm prepared to be able to handle. Jubilee, you went through something that was life-altering and changing, but like you got through it and you are here and you're, you know what I'm saying? And like, and David, you have this rich history, and you've talked about your parents, you know what I'm saying? And the people that you come from, working and organizing with in the fields and stuff like that, right? Like, those are things that make us strong. And I just feel like trauma is a part of life. It's been here all the time and it ain't going nowhere. And I think that people are using that. That's why I started using the term acute trauma, because everything is traumatic. If everything is traumatic, then nothing is traumatic. And I'm just saying, man, in life, like, the bills don't care about your trauma. They just don't. Your health, you need to get your health in order, and trauma is connected to health. But what I mean is, if you need to go to the doctor and get some stuff checked out, and you just decide that you're not going for whatever reasons, and you try to blame trauma, it don't matter. Like, and I just think that we are allowing people to say those things, but in their own household and with their own kids and with their own families, it's unacceptable. They're not letting their kids go through that. That was my only thing that I was trying to put out there.
You can have, and we do have, trauma informed, people are, the right is freaking out about trauma informed, they're like, oh my God. Right. It's a real thing.
You're right. Just built healing centered. Healing centered is
yeah. I mean, it doesn't mean that you can't have. It doesn't mean that
damn dog
with low expectations. I mean, you can have trauma informed programming and supports, and have high expectations for young people. Like, the two things are not mutually exclusive, and that's the challenge. Yeah.
I agree.
I agree with that. And I'm just like, yo, somebody help me along with the traumatic experiences that I had, right? Like, and we don't always identify like when we're going through like that is traumatic, right? But breast cancer was pretty tough. But I had a village. I did get it, but I also had people to carry me through and help me process it. And I'm saying that for now, not everybody had that. I was the cheerleader mom, like we got this and wiping the tears, but everybody didn't have that. Some people, they had parents that they were on damn pandemic overload themselves and experiencing anxiety and depression because of it and could not help their children. And now these babies are back in school. Right. So it's just like, I do believe that it's important for us to look at both. And they're taking in all the information from TikTok, their identity from what they're scrolling on the screen. So there's so many different factors.
We got to do that social media episode.
Woo! Oh, we can do that one next, because I mean that's part of the reasons I've left so many different things, and like I've just pulled myself back. Like I don't do any shows. I do this show, and I'm building some other stuff behind the scenes. But like, just for the record, people, a lot of stuff that you see posted on under my name under social media, it's not me posting it. I mean, I'll go in and interact, but I hate social media. I truly do. I know that I need it for my businesses. And I also had to change the cameras just now, David, because that damn dog done came up, and Jubilee wants that dog to have some airtime. I was talking to Jubilee. I'm talking about her like David. I'm gonna talk about her like she's not here, because we doing pre-show stuff, right? We here. I'm getting my monitors right and all that stuff. I'm trying to get my ear stuff right, and she's like talking to this person. She like name this name. She was talking to this damn dog like it was a human.
Aww.
He's talking to this damn. What's the dog's name? Go ahead.
Meadow Rose. And so
Meadow Rose.
I pick her up so that she won't distract me from finishing strong.
It's all good. She calls it Meadow Rose. I call it the damn dog. So there you go.
It's interesting. Now I'm thinking back to like my earlier experience, as a school leader in Oakland. And like this conversation is not new, and in some way, shape, or form, I've always found myself kind of in the middle, looking at both different sides. So, at one point in time in Oakland, this is going back now, like maybe 20 years, we had some charters like the High Expectations, No Excuses charters that were really bad for kids, right? I'm not going to name names, but you can figure it out.
I'm one of them, so I understand.
Yeah. I mean, and so. We were running a school that had high expectations, but also provided high supports. So we were like in the middle. And then you had other schools, some of the district schools that were opening up around that time that were like, like the culturally affirming kind of, rooted in community, culturally relevant curriculum. However, they weren't teaching children the basics. I mean, they were literally like they would do like 2 years of Mexican history for kids, that are from Mexico. and then they would come up for their standardized test scores under No Child Left Behind, and 0% of kids are proficient in US history. And then the schools get shut down and they think it's a conspiracy. I'm like, you know what? You got to be a grown up. You're not going to always like everything that we have to do in schools, but the truth resides somewhere in the middle. Like you can do the culturally affirming work and have high expectations.
For sure.
It's not about having blind high expectations and you're just like expelling kids left and right. And, like, it's not about, fully like always affirming a child's culture and learning about the struggle and, huelga and resistance, all that. It's somewhere in the middle. And I feel like this is just a different version of the culture wars that, we didn't call it the culture war back then, but, people have different interpretations or what they think schools should be doing. And a lot of those schools got shut down, and then they asked why. And I'm like, because kids aren't learning in your school, Yeah.
Right. I mean, I know we got to close up and I will go into final thoughts. I'll just say this though. And I'm all for it, man. Make the stuff make sense to us. You know what I'm saying? Like when you a dope teacher, when you a dope educator, you can take that stuff, man, and you can turn it into something. I just want to give props to Mr. Brown, who just retired. He was my algebra teacher. He just retired from KIPP, but he's taught in everything. And he was so dope at math, so dope that as he's teaching us Pythagorean theorem, he's also teaching us about who Pythagoras was and who Imhotep and Kemet and all this stuff, and like saying like, yo, actually this math stuff came from you and came from Africa, and like and he did that stuff. And he also was like, I'm gonna teach you math like a language. Like this is the math is truly the only it's the universal language of civilization. So I'm going to teach it to you as a language. So we would do definitions and using it, and how could you use Pythagorean theorem in real life? Where does that show up? What I'm saying is the state didn't have to do that for him. The system didn't have to do that for him. OUSD didn't do that for him. A charter network didn't do that for him. It was him as an educator getting so good and so dope at what he did and what he does that it was able to make it affirming. And I'll give an example of a white teacher, because I know you're like, well, that's a black teacher and his math and all this stuff. This white dude that taught psychology at my high school, everybody in that class ended up, that went to college, ended up majoring in psychology. A lot of us changed out of it because we didn't have him. But he was so dope, not because he tried to sound black. He didn't try to talk like us. He was a white motorcycle dude that listened to Pink Floyd. But he listened to what we like to listen to, and he was like, oh, okay. Well, I like these people named the Beatles and Pink Floyd, and like, but it was a cultural exchange, and he was so dope at psychology that like he made it relevant to us. And I get that there's a lot of fluff terms, and these terms started out with a really good heart, and they started out by really good and smart people. But what happens is good people build out new terms and new ways to do stuff, and then raggedy people get it and get lazy, and then they make it all look bad and crazy. You know what I'm saying? I think that all of you, as you look into our professional careers collectively, we know some people that done abuse the term self-care, that done abuse the term of trauma, that done abused culturally aware, that have abused DEI or whatever the case is, and makes it a joke. So I think those things in their inherent, how they were supposed to be built, are really important and really special. You know what I'm saying? And I think they could really change some stuff, but it's a lot of people that's not holding that standard bar. Let's go on to final thoughts. David, since this was your topic, let's say you for last. But Miss Jubilee, I will go after you because David got the beard of wisdom, the beard of knowledge got to close us out. So Jubilee, I'll go after you. What are your final thoughts?
Well, I was listening to your reflection about some really impactful teachers that you had in your life. And I think that as it relates to high expectations, if we had a task force filled with those sorts of teachers, we wouldn't have needed to shift any expectation, right? We could have still held the bar, right? And had a bunch of teachers who were well-trained, inspired, right? Reflective, thoughtful, creative in the classroom with our children, saying, I know you've been out for a year, 2 years, or what have you, right? But we're gonna close this gap together. We're gonna make it up together, right? And I'll be here. And if they had a supportive, school leader or administration, it would make it that much, not necessarily easier, but doable, right? So that we wouldn't have to keep on making that pendulum swing back and forth. All we do was provide enough support, right? And the belief. And so that's my final thought.
Awesome. I'll go into mine. I appreciate this topic. I love today's conversation. I love that we had a good exchange and went back and forth and pushed and challenged each other. And I think, I think we all ultimately would ended up in the same spaces. And I'll just say this. I think that there are a lot of well-meaning people and a lot of people that don't mean well. You should want your young people in your community to be prepared. You should want them to be able to compete with the world, because I know that we hate this thing about competition. And as much as people like to say that they hate capitalism and all that stuff, when you go outside, stuff still costs money. You know what I'm saying? And it's funny because a lot of those people that say how much they hate capitalism is selling you a book when they're selling you. But anyway, the point that I'm making is the point that I'm ultimately making is that we have to look out and take care of us. We have to make sure that we have things in addition to schools, in lieu of schools, that are not serving our best interests. And Jubilee, I appreciate you picking up on me talking about some of my good teachers. I'll tell you this, out of the 100+ teachers I've had, I had a lot less that were actually really, really high quality versus a lot of real bad ones. You know what I'm saying? And I think, but it is what it is. Those people are ultimately not responsible for me. They're not ultimately responsible for what I become. They don't have to live my life. They don't have to live with whether I make money or I don't make money. They don't have to live whether if I end up in shelters or not, or what I do for the world. And this is what I want to tell people out there, the parents that are listening, the family members that are listening, and you as students, if you're listening. At the end of the day, it ain't nobody else. You are nobody else's responsibility. Them kids ain't nobody's responsibility. They your responsibility ultimately. And that's not to say people don't love your kids. But when you get love, take it as a blessing, not as the norm and not as the standard. When you find quality, take it as a blessing, not as this is gonna happen everywhere I go, because it's not. And I think that we have to prepare our people to live in the world that they're in, so they can have the skill set to build the world that we want. And I don't think that we're doing that last part. I don't think that we are actually putting the skills on our people, so they can build things that work and build the better world that we say that we want. So, David, why don't you take us out, good brother?
All right, thank you. I definitely appreciated the conversation, and thank you to everybody in the comments. We see you. We did not get to all of your comments, but we really appreciate the dialogue. It helps with helps to form our conversation, and lets us know that you're listening too. So thank you for all that. I think 3 quick points. I think, based on my experience as a parent, like right now, the school system that we're in, I feel like they're listening to us. And so I think, especially now in this like post-pandemic, the social emotional, the socialization, the academic, concerns that we're all aware of, it's really important that school systems have their finger on the pulse. You could be one independent charter school or a district. You have to have mechanisms set up to continuously check the pulse of your community. What are parents saying? What are students saying? What are your teachers saying, right? And so any kind of shift is not a top down based on, what the cool thing of the day is. And there's like pendulum swinging that we're talking about, because that's harmful. It creates a lot. There are unintended consequences there, I think, that just aren't good for children. Number 2, I'm a big supporter of high expectations. I always have been. I think they have to come aligned with high support. And the other piece that I think Jubilee touched on, and we've touched on this show before, is, when you have a teacher workforce that looks like the children that they serve, then you can have that third element, which is called high love. I feel like, authentic love and care for children that have a similar background to you, that have a similar experience, right? So you can have high expectations, you can have high support, and there's high love, that third piece, which can be very difficult if the teachers in the front of the classroom don't look like the kids in the seats, right? It's hard, it gets misinterpreted, it gets manipulated. And then the last thing is, I actually think it's okay to work hard and be nice. So I'll leave it there.
And with that said, ladies and what'd you say, Jubilee? You muted. What'd you say?
Oh, I said
you're not muted. Go ahead. We just couldn't hear you.
Oh, I said I don't know why they dropped that for. Like, why did you drop the work hard, silly wabbits?
I'm telling you, they was getting a lot of pressure. Listen, man, like this stuff don't happen in a vacuum, man. These people are terrified. Like these people are terrified. They trying to not lose their jobs. But that has been Jubilee. That's been David. Our other guy, like I said, is probably rounding Uranus right now. You feel me? Going on the way to Pluto. He's gonna take some good pictures for us. He going up there to make sure that Pluto still knows that it's a planet in our hearts. And I've been Charles. And we will see you all again soon. Thank you again for attending the South Star Classroom. Class is now dismissed. Peace.